The sun beat down on a cracked Georgia street as two young cops sneered at the frail old man they'd forced onto the curb, his battered truck abandoned like scrap beside him. Laughter echoed off the empty storefronts until a black SUV rolled up and the atmosphere snapped taut like a drawn bow. When a towering man in full military regalia emerged, the color drained from the officers' faces as reality crashed down around them. But what happened next would shatter reputations and rewrite the town's history forever. First, let's go back to the beginning. The engine coughed once and fell into a low, rattling idle as the truck settled against the curb. A sigh of dust rose from the wheels, hanging briefly in the air like a ghost of past miles traveled. Officer Jake Reynolds adjusted his belt unconsciously, his fingers tapping against the butt of his flashlight. He didn't like vehicles like this, too much unknown packed into too little metal. Fairview didn't see much action, and maybe that was the problem. A slow town bred itchy nerves. Jake's instincts, sharpened more by boredom than experience, tingled with a vague sense of opportunity. Beside him, Officer Mark Stevens ambled out of the cruiser, his mirrored sunglasses flashing under the heavy sun. "Let's make it quick," he said under his breath, flashing a grin that didn't reach his eyes. He wore the grin the way a wolf wore its teeth, casual, but never quite friendly. Jake approached first, boots crunching over cracked asphalt. The driver's window creaked downward with mechanical stubbornness, revealing the old man behind the wheel. Leonard Hayes didn't flinch. His face was a map of weathered lines and sun-scorched skin, the kind of face carved over decades, not years. His cap, bearing a faded insignia no one bothered to recognize anymore, was tugged low, shadowing a pair of pale blue eyes steady as still water. Jake leaned in, the air inside the cab thick with the smells of engine oil, old leather, and something less identifiable, something like the past refusing to die. "License and registration," he snapped, the words sharp, clipped, a hammer looking for a nail. Without a word, Leonard shifted in his seat. His hands, knotted and scarred from hard living, moved with deliberate care, fishing a battered wallet from his back pocket and retrieving a folded registration from the glove box. He passed the papers to Jake without making eye contact, a small, almost imperceptible gesture of surrender or patience. Jake thumbed through the license. Leonard Hayes, age 73, no priors, address listed just outside town limits. Nothing jumped out, but Jake wasn't looking for nothing. He was looking for something. Anything. Mark had sauntered up by now, peering over Jake's shoulder. "Real piece of work you got here," he muttered, half to Leonard, half to the empty street. Leonard said nothing. He just rested his gnarled hands on the steering wheel, thumbs brushing against the cracked leather, waiting. There was no fear in his posture, no anxiety, just a heavy, worn-out stillness, as if he had stood through tempests worse than this and learned long ago that panic only fed the fire. Jake's jaw tightened. He hated that quiet. It felt like defiance disguised as politeness. Without a word, he nodded toward the side of the road. "Step out of the vehicle, sir." Leonard hesitated for the briefest second, just long enough for Jake to feel it like a slap, and then complied, unfolding himself from the seat, like a man much older than his years. His boots hit the pavement with a hollow thud. The sun blazed against the scene, bleaching the colors until everything looked worn, tired, and irreversibly small. Fairview watched, unseen from windows and shaded porches, as history repeated itself again on its cracked streets. Authority mistaking silence for guilt, power mistaking patience for weakness. And Leonard Hayes, soldier of forgotten wars, stood tall beside his battered truck, saying nothing, demanding nothing, waiting for whatever would come next. Jake stalked around the battered Ford like a predator circling a wounded animal, tapping the truck's dented skin with exaggerated clacks of his flashlight. Each metallic thud echoed into the afternoon heat, a performance more for his own satisfaction than for any legitimate purpose. The old pickup gave no secrets away, only the sound of fatigue layered over years of honest wear. Jake leaned low, inspecting the tires, peering beneath the chassis, sniffing for anything. Contraband, mechanical fault, a reason to justify the unease gnawing at his gut. Mark, lounging against the cruiser, tossed loud comments into the thick air, each one dripping with the smug derision of a man convinced of his superiority. "These old-timers think they're untouchable," he jeered, crossing his arms. "Think they can drive around like it's still 1950. His laughter was sharp and humorless, bouncing off storefront windows down the mostly empty street. Leonard Hayes remained still, hands resting atop his knees as he sat obediently on the blistering curb. The heat radiated off the asphalt, rising in shimmering waves that distorted the world above it. Sweat beaded along his hairline, sliding down the creases of his weathered face. His back was straight, a soldier's posture never forgotten, though time had robbed it of some of its proud height. He answered every barking question from the officers with short, respectful replies, his voice steady even when the indignity bit into him like a blade. When Jake demanded he stand again, Leonard obeyed without hesitation. His body, stiff and aching, moved with visible strain as he rose. He raised his arms when instructed, and Jake's hands patted him down roughly, too roughly, searching for threats that existed only in the younger man's assumptions. Mark watched with idle disinterest, chewing gum noisily, as if the whole ordeal were entertainment instead of another slow, public degradation of a man who deserved better. The search turned up nothing but Leonard's dignity, which lay bruised and battered in the dust beside him. Jake, unwilling to let the encounter end without claiming some petty prize, flipped Leonard's registration paperwork over in his hand, scanning for a technicality. His eyes lit up when he found it. An inspection sticker, expired by just 8 days. Barely a misdemeanor, barely worth a warning, but Jake announced it like a felony. "Truck's not roadworthy," he declared, voice carrying across the street. "We're impounding it." Mark chuckled, the sound ugly and mean. "He can hoof it home. Lucky we don't haul him in for resisting." Leonard swallowed hard, feeling the world tilt precariously against him once more. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from an effort to contain the molten anger roiling deep inside his chest. He knew this battle. He had fought it before, in jungles far from home and in the cracked sidewalks of small American towns. Fighting back now would only serve them. He lowered his eyes and said, with quiet dignity, "I'll wait here." His words floated in the heavy air, a soft refusal to break, no matter how hard they tried to shatter him. The minutes dragged like hours, the relentless southern sun baking the sidewalk until the air itself seemed to hum with heat. Jake and Mark leaned lazily against their cruiser, shaded only by the barest sliver of its frame. Their conversation was little more than a low murmur of mockery, punctuated by bursts of laughter as they thumbed through their phones, swapping videos and jokes with the careless detachment of men who believed they were invincible. Across from them, Leonard Hayes remained seated on the curb, a silent figure slowly melting into the scenery. His dusty flannel clung to his back, soaked through with sweat. Deep furrows etched his brow as the heat bore down on him, but he didn't move, didn't complain. His gnarled hands rested loosely on his knees, fingers twitching now and then from the strain of keeping still. Every bead of sweat that slid down his face carried with it the invisible weight of old battles fought and dignity still unyielded. Fairview's main street shimmered in the heat haze, empty except for a few curious locals peeking through Venetian blinds and half-opened shop doors. Most stayed silent, unwilling to interfere, but the wrongness of the scene itched at the edges of their conscience. It was the kind of wrongness too familiar to confront, too uncomfortable to name. Then came the shift. The kind of shift that doesn't announce itself with noise, but with a tightening of the air, a sense of impending consequence. Without warning, a sleek black SUV turned the corner and glided to a halt across the street. It didn't belong to Fairview. Everything about it, the spotless sheen, the government plates, the heavy, almost predatory presence, marked it as something foreign, something important. The doors opened in tandem. 2 men stepped out first, their uniforms immaculate, the sun flashing off polished buttons and pressed creases so sharp they seemed carved from stone. The street seemed to hold its breath. A third figure emerged, and the very air around him seemed to harden. General Marcus Tate. He wore his command like a second skin, 4 stars glinting on his shoulders, a chest crowded with medals that told stories of valor, blood, and duty the way books never could. Gasps escaped from the handful of witnesses. Murmurs rippled like a sudden breeze through the town. Jake and Mark stiffened instinctively, sensing a shift, but not yet understanding its gravity. General Tate's boots struck the asphalt with deliberate, almost thunderous steps as he crossed the street, eyes locked on Leonard. The old man did not rise to meet him. He didn't need to. Standing at full attention, the general halted before Leonard and delivered a crisp, formal salute, the kind reserved for legends, not for men sitting humbled on a curb. "Sir, your vehicle broke down, I assume." The general's voice cut through the silence, each word weighted, undeniable. Leonard, sweat-streaked and weary, gave a small, measured nod. He said nothing. He didn't need to. Jake and Mark felt the blood drain from their faces, the enormity of their mistake descending on them like a hammer through glass. General Tate stood between Leonard and the officers, his towering frame radiating a barely contained fury. His gaze locked onto Jake and Mark, sharp enough to cut through body armor, and for a moment, the entire town seemed to shrink under the weight of his presence. "Do you know who this man is?" he demanded, his voice a low growl, controlled but lethal. Neither officer moved. The silence was suffocating, thick with the unspoken understanding that no answer could possibly save them now. Tate didn't wait for a reply. His voice rose just enough to carry over the growing crowd, each word striking like a hammer. "This man," he said, stabbing a finger toward Leonard without turning his head, "is a retired command sergeant major. 3 tours in Vietnam, 2 Bronze Stars for valor under fire." He paused, letting the weight of those words hang in the air like a noose tightening. "He saved my life, and the lives of 37 others, on a night in 1971 so hellish most men wouldn't have survived a minute. And today you," he said, his gaze slicing into Jake and Mark, "you humiliate him for driving an old truck." The murmurs from the bystanders turned into a rising tide of outrage. People who had watched from behind curtains and cracked doors now stepped into the open, drawn by the magnetic force of the confrontation. Whispers became curses. Disbelief became anger. Jake, sweat trickling down his temples, found his voice only to lose it again halfway through his desperate defense. We were just following procedure, sir," he croaked, his voice cracking under the scrutiny. General Tate took a step forward, so close now that Jake could see the fine lines etched into the general's weathered face. Lines earned, not given. His voice dropped to a whisper so sharp it might as well have been a blade drawn across skin. "Procedure," he hissed, "doesn't include disrespecting a hero. It doesn't include treating an old soldier like garbage because he doesn't shine like your damn cruiser." Mark shifted uncomfortably, but Jake stood frozen, feeling the full collapse of his authority under the merciless judgment of a man who had faced death and walked away. Just then, another vehicle, sleek, black, and bearing no markings but unmistakably official, pulled up behind the SUV. 2 men in suits emerged, moving with brisk, deliberate purpose. Without speaking a word to Jake or Mark, they retrieved the impound paperwork from the cruiser, ripped it neatly in half, and disappeared into the building where the tow orders had been filed. The symbolic destruction of that paper was louder than any siren. Tate turned back to Leonard, his entire demeanor shifting in an instant. The harshness melted into something reverent. He dropped to one knee, not in submission, but in the only gesture appropriate for a man paying tribute to someone greater than himself. His polished boots scuffed against the hot asphalt as he extended his hand. "Sir," he said, voice thick with respect, "let's get you home properly." Leonard, blinking against the sting of heat and emotion, reached out slowly. Their hands met, young strength and old sacrifice, and the world around them seemed to hold its breath. The black SUV rolled away from the curb with a silent authority, its tinted windows gleaming like obsidian under the harsh sun. Inside, Leonard Hayes sat tall and unbowed, his hands folded neatly in his lap, the crisp interior wrapping around him like a long-overdue embrace of dignity. As the vehicle turned the corner and vanished from sight, the world around Jake and Mark seemed to slow, leaving them stranded in a hollow space of their own making. They stood there, motionless, their uniforms feeling heavier by the second. The sun that had once blazed with a casual cruelty now seemed to scorch with purpose, peeling back the layers of their bravado and exposing the smallness that festered underneath. Neither spoke. What words could bridge the chasm between the authority they had abused and the honor they had trampled? Word of the incident raced through Fairview faster than wildfire on a dry summer night. Within hours, the body cam footage, clipped, shared, and dissected, spread far beyond their sleepy town, igniting outrage across the state and soon the country. Screens flickered to life in homes, diners, and government offices, each one replaying the same devastating sequence. Two smug officers humiliating a war hero who never once raised his voice, even as they stripped him of his pride. Public outcry was swift and merciless. The Fairview Police Department scrambled, issuing a formal apology that reeked of damage control more than genuine remorse. But it was too late. The tide had turned, and no carefully worded statement could hold it back. Jake and Mark were suspended indefinitely, their badges and weapons turned in under the grim gaze of their own superiors. Their careers, once bright with the naive confidence of youth, withered almost overnight, crushed under the undeniable weight of their own arrogance. There would be no quiet reassignment, no second chances whispered about behind closed doors. They were marked now, not as lawmen, but as a cautionary tale of hubris meeting justice. Meanwhile, something extraordinary took root in Fairview. A week later, the town gathered beneath a flawless blue sky to honor the man they had nearly forgotten. Banners fluttered along the streets, bearing Leonard Hayes' name in bold letters. Children lined the sidewalks, waving small American flags, their faces alight with awe. Veterans stood at solemn attention, their own uniforms a living testament to battles fought across decades and continents. Leonard, wearing a freshly pressed suit and a humble smile, accepted the town's recognition with quiet grace. He shook hands, posed for pictures, and listened patiently as speeches celebrated his life, his service, and his sacrifice. And though the memory of humiliation could never fully be erased, it was buried beneath a new legacy, a legacy not of shame, but of respect finally restored. As Leonard stood on the steps of the town hall saluting a sea of grateful faces, he felt something settle inside him at last, a long overdue peace, earned the hard way, and all the sweeter for it.